worries, Fallen. Oh, wrong stream. Full screen. All right, there we go. No worries, Fallen. I am going to be talking about the author that rewrote it, the artist that did the illustrations for it, and a little bit about the history. So take your time. No worries before I actually get into the meat of the book. Um, that being said, bear with me. Let's see. So, as you can see, dear viewers, this is the cover of Cinderella. So, this is fully illustrated and is part of a series done by Arthur Rackham, the artist. Arthur has kind of a unique style of artwork. Let me grab here. So this is another Arthur Rackham. As you can see, very detailed pen and ink and watercolor style. He drew a lot of inspiration from Nordic themes, as well as a little bit of like Asian themes and styles. Um, he did a lot of different illustrations from during pretty much the golden age of British illustration. Um, Arthur Rackham, who we're kind of focusing on a little bit today, and normally focus more on the authors, but I was really inspired by Arthur Rackham's artwork, and I just thought his work is so beautiful. Here's a picture from Rip Van Winkle. Here he is walking down the road with all of the dogs around him. Um, that last picture I posted was this one here is from Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, you know, changing the numbers. Here is another one. This is from Snowdrop. I do believe that Snowdrop would be considered Snow White, perhaps. Um, these were all illustrated in the um, I'd say 1900s, like Rip Van Winkle 1905, Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens 1906. This Snowdrop one was I think 1908. Here's another picture of from his fairy book that he produced. An ogre and all of these cute little gnomes running around. This was in 1933. I think they were stealing his shoe. Yeah, they were stealing his shoes. So, Arthur Rackham, born in September of 1867, died in September of 1939. He is one of the most celebrated artists in British history during the golden age of illustration, and he was able to delight readers of all ages with his incredibly beautiful stylized paintings. I unfortunately do not have any photos of Arthur Rackham. I haven't been able to find any. Um, his line work, though, is just immaculate. Like this painting here. Or I guess this would technically be a reprinting of a drawing of a that was printed onto a plate. But this is from the Tales of Mystery and Imagination that he produced in 1935. Amazing detail, all of the ship, all of the sails, all of the waves, the sea serpent writhing around. It's just beautiful. Um, he was most known for probably The Wind in the Willows. Um, he did turn down illustrating The Midsummer's Night's Dream. He drew a great number of Shakespearean drawings that he published in 1908. He did a bunch of different images that represented uh, an alternate reality. He drew in readers and individuals into the stories through his incredibly beautiful and vivid imagery. Here are a couple of other pieces here. So this is from his illustrations from Undine, which was a Friedrich de Laumont Foucault first edition that was produced by the William Heinemann House in 1909. Just, it's giving Art Nouveau, it's giving Japanese wave work, it's giving incredible detailed nuances like the texture. There's so much texture here, like the texture of the tree, the roof, the cliff faces, the mountains. Arthur Rackham was just an incredible artist. Absolutely magnificent artist. I'm going to leave that one up because I love it so much. Um, so, in his stories, he has very unmistakable trees. Like, his trees are like one of his trademarks. You can find, whenever you find artwork that is Arthur Rackham, his trees are all very unique. So, you can see this tree right here, which I'm not sure if that's a cypress or what kind of tree it is, but that tall, meandering tree with a big kind of blossom on the top is very, very Arthur Rackham. Here's another one, Alice in Wonderland, when she's talking to the rabbit. So you have this very cut back tree, poor thing, and then these very detailed flowering stems that are in the background. Uh, he just has this very whimsical style to every type of tree that he drew. Here we have him, the talking, this was from the fir tree and the bramble from Aesop's fable tales, fables that he illustrated. Here is a piece from the Little Red Riding Hood that he illustrated. Again, just all of that hash marks and the details in the branches and the curvature of the, I'm guessing, aspen, maybe birch trees, and then the wolf and Red Riding Hood down at the bottom. He has illustrated so many fables. Like, I can't even name them all off. That he's just been a prolific artist during his time. Um, he spent the majority of his time in London with his 12 siblings. He is the third surviving child of Annie and Alfred Rackham. He did spend a brief period of time in Australia due to his health, so that way he could be in a warmer climate. He spent his early education in the City of London School. He won a number of prizes for his drawings during his school days, but, quote, he showed little of the imaginative genius, unquote, which marked his adult artwork. Immediately after leaving school, Rackham started working as a clerk in Westminster. Let me go back to some of the artwork I just love to look at. That's going to be the book. One of the trees. Ah, yes, the Undine. We'll leave that up because I like it so much. So he went to his artistic studies at Lambeth School, and by 1892 he began reporting and illustrating for a number of London newspapers. So his work was published all over. Um, quote, distasteful hack work, unquote, as he himself described it. During this period, Rackham was contributing to the occasional illustration of magazines such as Scraps and Chums, and his efforts decidedly were in an effort to create his own artistic style. He was trying to develop what he wanted to be as an artist. His first book illustrations were for The Other Side, which was a traveling guide, and now, unfortunately, it's a very rare book. And then the next piece was the Dolly Dialogues, which he published in 1893 and 1894, respectively. These publications, the Dolly Dialogues and The Other Side, marked the beginning of his long and illustrious career as an illustrator. I am going to butcher this name. The first book that he illustrated for was a commission called The Zanky Wank and the Byther Witch, which was produced in 1896, which marked the beginning of his lighter and more ethereal artwork. His fantastical work that you see here now in his later career, um, it just exudes exuberant frivolity and just this illuminated beauty from within. Um, the real turning point in his work, however, changed in around 1900 when he became the portrait painter for Edith Starkey. She was the most, quote, stimulating and severest critic and his future wife. Starkey helped Rackham expand his artistic range, moving him away from simpler techniques to pure line drawing, which you can see exhibited here in the Undine. Uh, and then adding those watercolor washes to give that softness, that delicate, ethereal beauty within. This shift could not have come at a more fortuitous moment in his life after his marriage. The technological advances in printing meant that his images could be photomechanically reproduced, thus removing the traditional middleman of the engraver. So his artwork, instead of going from drawing to engraver to printing, they took out the engraving process and he was able to draw his images and they would literally just be able to print them directly into pages. This allowed him to display his talent as a line expert um, prolifically. His Because an engraver could only interpret what they could see, and sometimes the engravers couldn't emulate the style that he had created, so they would make much more simpler versions of his actual artwork. Um, so the more luxurious colors and lavish details that made his reputation as an artist were pasted in or, quote, tipped in after the book was finally printed. So this was an expensive process, but the results helped create the new gift book market. The idea of giving a picture book to a child, it can be laid at the foot of his door. He himself created these beautiful, fantastical images during the 19th century that allowed people to want to gift them to children. And the idea of a gift book, something that was not just mentally stimulating from the written word, but visually stimulating and stunning, helped create that gift exchange that has lasted to this very day. Um, his first widely distributed gift book was Rip Van Winkle, which he published in 1905. It contained 51 color plates, um, all drawn by Arthur Rackham. This established him as a leading decorative illustrator during the Edwardian period. Rackham created the first plate by painstakingly drawing his subject in a sinuous pencil line before applying a thin ink layer. He then used the layer upon layer of delicate watercolors reminiscent of the Art Nouveau style to build up that romantic yet ethereal result, which is what his reputation was constructed and based off of. Most recognizable in retrospect is his good-natured calmness of his drawings. All of his artwork has this sort of sweetness to it. When you, maybe not this one specifically, but there's this kind of the smile on the ogre's face, the smiles on the cherubic little gnomes, uh, the smile on the king, the smile on the midwife, the baby, that just have this sort of sweetness about them that is it just brings joy to look upon it. Um, let's see here. Well, what else did I want to cover? Um, his probably most successful commercial book that he published was the Christmas gift book. Of course, that included the beloved children's tale Alice's Adventures in Wonderland that he produced in 1907. Um, he was unable to he was unable to illustrate the first edition of Kenneth Grahame's story The Wind in the Willows, and he he did his very best to pick and choose because he was well sought after as an artist, and he was very concerned during the later part of his life and later part of his illustration career, um, because of the changes in technology and the printing process. Um, some of the artists were like moving away from these highly detailed styles that he was known for and moving into a much more simpler style, which led to, let me grab it real quick, which led to the versions like he published with the Heinemann Company two books, Cinderella, and then followed up with Sleeping Beauty. I'll be reading both this week, where they were these beautiful black silhouettes. And he was able to still pack in, as you can see, so much detail into these illustrations. So here we have Cinderella on one side and the fairy godmother, a little witchy perhaps, but the fairy godmother on the other side. And she is going to grow that pumpkin into the coach and carriage that we're aware of. And then up at the top we have these highly detailed lizards surrounding, I'm not really sure why lizards, like that was an interesting artistic choice, but then we have the mouse in the cage, or rat in the cage, and all of the mice falling down to become the coachmen for the coach. um, but it's just beautifully done. Here, let me go back to the actual. I'm just gonna. I'm gonna save that one. I really like it so much. Okay, so that is about Arthur Rackham, and this edition is retold by Charles Seddon Evans. So let me talk about him briefly. So, Charles Seddon Evans was born in 1883 and passed away in 1944. So he actually, by that number, I guess he must have outlived Arthur Rackham by a couple of years. But let me see, grab that. So, he was educated in the East London College and began his career as a schoolmaster. So, before joining the publishing house of Edward Arnold as the educational editor in 1909, he moved to the firm of Heinemann, where all of these books were illustrated and produced, in 1913, where he spent the rest of his working life. He became the chairman and eventually the managing director in 1932. He wrote this version of Cinderella during that time, which was illustrated by Arthur Rackham, as well as Sleeping Beauty. The first appeared in the first English version of La Belle au Bois Dormant. So is the Charles Perrault's um, original Sleeping Beauty. So I think I'll talk about that on Friday. Um, he expanded upon the stories. So he expanded on Cinderella's story. He's omitting some of the more darker aspects of like the mother, the stepmother asking her to like cook her children, and some of the darker, more grimmer tales that Brothers Grimm, which we previously have covered, um, are known for, because they just grab the story from the raw from these various towns all over Europe, and some of those stories are very dark, and so these stories that are a little softer and expanded a little bit more. And I think this version of Cinderella may have led to the more modern Disney interpretation of Cinderella. Let's see here. Lastly, I do want to talk a little bit more about the illustrations. Okay, here's the information a little bit more. So, as you can see, let's grab that. So, uh, as I had previously spoken of, Arthur Rackham's artwork during that 19th century, 20th century, during the Edwardian era, saw the emergence of picture books, these illustrated images in written words that were given as gifts. They were no longer anonymous artists. They were technical advances in printing and the growing need for books for the middle class in that market. The publication of Rackham's books was highly anticipated and built up a huge revenue during the Christmas time. And his carefully timed exhibitions of his original work, uh, showing the forthcoming books that were held annually in the galleries in London, generated further excitement. Rackham's publisher, William Heinemann, also pioneered a new strategy to cater to true devotees to his artwork, releasing beautifully printed and bound limited edition deluxe, numbered and signed by Rackham himself, alongside the standard trade editions. So let me grab here. Here is an example of the Cinderella that was like the limited edition. I think they did like 625 of each of Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, but just hardbound, leather bound, imprinted. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Thank you, Velis. Thank you for the resub. Um, so this is that limited edition illustration version of Cinderella here. Just immaculate. The paper, everything about it was just beautifully, masterfully done with the silhouettes. Let's see, go back up to here. So he things were going really well during that period, but during the aftermath of World War I, the demand for these lavish, expensive books was really uncertain. There just wasn't a demand for them anymore. And he actually feared that his style of illustration, these elaborate, colorful illustrations, were falling out of favor with the advent of more modern artistic styles. So these books, Cinderella in 1919 and Sleeping Beauty in 1920, um, had all of those beautiful details that he was known for, but done in a more modern style in these silhouettes. So he does incorporate a couple of full illustrations in the books, but he actually has a number of these silhouettes in these 2 to 3 color prints that are just going to be throughout the book that are just absolutely gorgeous. Let me see here. Exploiting his mastery of outline, he was able to contrast the repugnant profiles of this is going to be in Sleep in Cinderella here, but the repugnant profiles of the stepsisters versus the delicate features of Cinderella all are captured in those silhouette styles. Um, the morphing of the mice into the coachmen, everything. It is a touted beautiful piece of work. Anyway, I digress. We have gone on and on and on and on and on. So let me get into the meat and potatoes here. Okay. So today we are going to be covering Cinderella. Here she is, staring out the window, looking super pensive, wearing the cast off remains of other clothing, rags pretty much that she's stitched together. Highly elaborate framework. We have a mouse, we have some almost lizard looking creatures, some another lizard, all of these rats or mice up at the top, and then all of the people sort of dancing. And there's 3 tone colors there: black, the olive green, which was probably a brighter green, and that pink, which is probably a faded red. This illustration was so valuable in this first part of the book. There's actually this separate piece of paper here, this translucent piece, that is to protect that illustration from transferring onto the title page. Which again, elaborate mice, elaborate lizards running around. We have I'm not sure what his title would be, but he might have been a lord, but somebody that was working for the prince holding up the glass slipper for Cinderella. the title down at the bottom, London William Heinemann, Philadelphia J.P. Lippincott Company. So just beautiful artwork, and you're going to see that through this whole book. So this one was produced in 1919, and here we have our first page of chapter 1, The Little Girl in the Big House. So we have Cinderella sitting here on a stool in silhouette with a broom in her hand. I will go ahead and let the images speak for themselves, unless something particularly catches my eye. So as a friendly reminder, dear listeners, my Librophiles, our artistic listeners, please settle in, take care of yourselves, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to do to enjoy um, the story. So, bear with me a second here. Okay, and close that. There we go. Cinderella, as retold by C.S. Evans and illustrated by Arthur Rackham. Chapter 1, The Little Girl in the Big House. Once upon a time there was a nobleman who was married to a sweet and beautiful lady. They had one child, a little girl named Ella, and they lived in a big house in the country. What a fine house that was! There was more rooms in it than you could count on your fingers and toes, and each room was full of the grandest furniture. Ella had a room all to herself, with pictures of fairy stories on the walls and cupboards full of toys, and she used to play there on wet days after she had done her lessons and her embroidery. When the weather was fine, however, Ella much preferred to play in the garden, which was so big and so full of interesting things that nobody could get tired of it. There was a lake in the garden with 9 swans on it, and there was a little summer house all covered with roses, and there was an orchard where apples and pears and plum trees grew. At the end of a long drive by the lodge-keeper's cottage were the big gates that shut the garden off from the road. The road led to the town, which was a mile away, and all sorts of interesting people came walking along it. Peddler men and beggars, and soldiers in splendid uniforms with pikes on their shoulders, marching left, right. Once, Ella saw the king and queen go by in a grand coach. The young prince was with them, and all the people came out of their cottages to see him and to shout, "Hurrah!" For he was a very handsome and lovable young prince. He smiled at Ella as he went by, and she waved her hand to him and wished he would stop and come to play with her in the garden. Although Ella had no brothers or sisters, she seldom felt lonely because there was always her mother to play with her and tell her stories. Her mother knew so many stories that she could tell a new one every night. Oh, oh my. Welcome in, Raiders. Hi. My goodness. Hi, Wild. I thought you would be playing for a while yet. I was thinking I'd be able to read this. And hi, Debbie. Welcome in. Welcome in. Yep. Welcome in, dear Raiders. Hello. I am Vexing Cat. If you've not been here before, I am a retro tiger librarian. I read classic literature, poetry, whatnot. Hi, Tiny. Welcome in. Uh, I'm currently reading a revision of Cinderella. Hi, Deuce. Welcome in. I'm not sure. I think, yeah, it's your first time. Welcome in. Uh, this is a version. So the original book was written by, I believe it was Charles Perrault, which was a French author. And this is a revision told in I'm like 2 pages in. I've been doing a lot of the history of the book, and these were illustrated by Arthur Rackham in 1919 is when this book was produced. So, British illustrator. If you have not seen his work, incredibly fantastical pieces. This whole book series of Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty were produced because um, his artwork was so fantastical that they needed to dial it back to the more simple modern styles. So here's an example of the book as it was produced, and let me grab this Undine. So this style here, the Undine, is what he is known for. Just absolutely whimsical, playful, beautiful artwork that he produced during the, I forget, it would be 19th century if it was late 1800s, and 20th century if it was early 1900s. But yes, during the 19th and 20th century,
Drink
amazing artwork.
water.
Aw, thank
Become
you. I will stay hydrated.
moist.
Moist. Yes, I am staying moist. That sounds terrible. Do not take that out of context. This drawing is sick. This is from the book The Undine. Beautiful. Absolutely immaculate. But yes, today we are reading Cinderella, which was produced by the Heinemann Company in 1919. So, yes. Welcome in. Thank you for the follow so much. That was the Siarnap. Oh yes, you were one of the players today. The cute scary doll with the blue hair. I remember. That was really pretty. While Dosis has wandered into the Do Not Disturb section of the library, we hope you enjoy the ambiance in the meantime. Thank you for lurking. Thank you very much, Wild. I'm glad for the lurk. All right. Let's see. The last paragraph there. Although Ella had no brothers or sisters, she seldom felt lonely because there was always her mother to play with her and tell her stories. Her mother knew so many stories that she could tell a new one every night. Almost. Every night almost, and they were the most interesting stories one could possibly imagine. Now, Ella's father spent most of his time in the library, reading books. Great heavy books without a single picture in them and no conversations, as Ella well knew, for she had one day stolen a peep at one. Perhaps these books were full of stories. If they were, however, her father never told her any of them. In fact, he hardly ever spoke to her or to anybody else. Every morning after breakfast he would go away to his library and sit there, reading, with a big pair of horn spectacles on his nose, or writing with a quill pen that made a funny, scratchy noise. There were not many little girls who were happier than Ella up to the time when she was 12 years old. Then a great sorrow came into her life, for her mother was taken ill. All the cleverest doctors came from miles around to give her physic, but none of them could do any good. Ella used to stand by the window and watch them drive up in their carriages. There were there were most of them they were most of them big, important-looking men, dressed in black, shiny silk clothes with white lace on the sleeves, and they took snuff and said "Ahem!" a great many times. Ella was very anxious to know whether they were going to cure her dear mother, but they always spoke in very low voices, and they looked so important and so solemn that she did not dare to ask any questions. And then, one morning, when she came downstairs, she found her father sitting in the big armchair with his head buried in his hands. That doesn't sound good. He did not say anything to her for a long time, and then he came over and put his hand upon her head and stroked her hair. "We are all alone now, dear," he said, and Ella knew without any more telling that her mother was dead. All that day she crept about with a white face, trying to realize what had happened to her. It seemed impossible to believe that she would never again hear her mother's voice or see her gentle smile. At night, when she went to bed, she could not sleep. and at last she got up and went to the window and stood there looking into the garden. It was very dark and mysterious out there. A wind was blowing among the trees, sighing like somebody in pain, and the moon shone fitfully from behind barred clouds. And then a strange thing happened. For as Ella stood there with the tears which she could not restrain rolling down her cheeks, she thought she saw the figure of an old woman among the bushes on the edge of the lawn. It was too dark to see very plainly, but the strange figure seemed to be dressed in a long black cloak and a queer pointed hat, and to be leaning on a stick. As Ella watched, the moon shone out full for a moment and lighted up the face of the woman who was staring straight at Ella's window. It was an old face, but very, very tender, and the smile on the wrinkled lips was so beautiful that Ella stretched out her arms to the figure and gave a cry. Then the clouds rolled over the face of the moon, and the shadows darkened in the garden. And when Ella looked again, the, the figure had vanished. Chapter 1. All right. As a friendly reminder, I'm going to probably do it less between these chapters because they're so short. But as a friendly reminder, especially you dear readers that just happened to fall in today, um, thank you for listening, but also be sure that you're taking care of yourselves. Do whatever you need to do to be comfortable, whether that's grab a book or grab a snack or grab something to drink, whatever you need to do to help you relax and enjoy the story. Chapter 2. Ella Goes to School. What a change came over the house now that there was no mother to keep things in order. Ella's father shut himself up in his library more than ever. The servants gossiped on the stairs instead of attending to their work, and Ella wandered about the house with nobody to talk to and nothing to do. Even the garden did not seem the same place, and the fruit that grew upon the south wall and the orchard seemed to have lost its flavor. There was no longer any fun in having picnics in the summer house, for nobody swept it out nowadays, and all sorts of creepy crawling things such as spiders and earwigs, which Ella hated, came and made their homes there. How can you enjoy a picnic if you are always picking spiders and long-legged gnats out of your teacup? This state of things was the fault of the gardener, who had become very lazy, and who used to spend the whole day leaning on his spade and smoking a long clay pipe. Kind of like Ben Weatherstaff. And then a worse thing happened. For one day Ella's father told her that she must go away to school. She did not like this in the least. I mean, what child does? And begged to be allowed to stay at home and do lessons in the morning as she had done when her mother was alive. All is for your own good, my dear, said her father. There is nobody to teach you now, and you will be all the better for the society of other little girls of your own age.
Drink
Oh,
water. Become moist.
welcome in, Raiders. Hi, Sammy the Book Mouse. Oh, what a wonderful name. Welcome in, Sammy. Welcome in, Raiders. Hello. Um, if I can remember how to do anything. Hi, I am Vexen Cat, a retro tiger librarian. Welcome in. I am just starting to read in chapter 2 of Cinderella as retold by Charles Sutton Evans and illustrated by Arthur Rackham. Welcome in. If you haven't been here before, settle in, grab a snack, grab something to drink. I'm just here to tell a story, and this one's a beautiful one. This is from the 1919 produced uh, um book by Arthur Rackham. If you were here earlier, I talked about Arthur Rackham, the illustrator, British Golden Age illustrator, and C.S. Evans is from the Heinemann Company. I think he was the head publisher at this time. Welcome in, Tiger. Tiger Faye, probably one of my favorite streamers as well. If you have not checked out their work, I highly recommend it. Um, I haven't seen you here before, Sammy, so let's give Sammy a shout out. Um, I've been rated 3 times in so much time, and I don't know what I'm thinking. At Sammy, Sammy the Book Mouse. Wonderful. Thank you. Uh, huh. I didn't really hear much of anything there, but strange. Welcome in, Sammy, and thank you for bringing and sharing your community with me. Yes, follow Sammy. Other readers, it's always good to have. Uh, where was I? Oh, yes. Cinderella chapter 2. There we go. All the better for the society of other little girls of your own age. And so her boxes were packed, and a chaise came to the door, and Ella drove away. Ella remained at school for 2 whole years, so from 12 to 14, and during all that time she did not see her home. Then one day her father came with the carriage to bring her back again. When they had left the town well behind, he took Ella's little hand in his big one and said, "You must have been very lonely in the house after your mother died. Were you not lonely, child?" "Yes, indeed," answered Ella, and the tears came into her eyes when she thought of the dear mother whom she would never see again in the world. Excuse me. There we go. A little bit better. Okay. "Yes, indeed," answered Ella, and the tears came into her eyes when she thought of the dear mother whom she would never see again in this world. "But you see," she went on, "I have been thinking over things while I have been at school, and I have made up my mind to try not to be lonely any more. There are so many things that mother used to do which I can do instead. One of these days I shall have to take her place, so I may as well begin now, mayn't I?" "Of course," said her father, "and you are a very good little girl to think of it. But there has been a change while you have been away, and I want to tell you about it." "A change?" cried Ella, opening her eyes wide. "Yes," the Baron went on, speaking rather fast, as though he had to say something unpleasant and wanted to get over. "Somebody has come to live with us while you have been away. Somebody who will, I hope, take a mother's place to you. A lady has, ahem, done me the honor to accept my hand. That is to say, child, I am married again, and my wife has 2 daughters who will also live with us for the future. You must try to like them for my sake." This piece of news was so much of a surprise to Ella that for a time she could not say a word. A stranger in her mother's house, sitting in her mother's chair, doing the things her mother used to do. The very thought made a big lump come into her throat. "What are their names?" she said at last. "The girls' names, I mean." "One is called Charlotte," answered her father, "and the other is Euphronia." That was a choice. "I like the name of Charlotte," said Ella miserably. "Are they big girls or little ones?" "Well, you see," said her father, "correctly speaking, they are not girls at all. That is to say, child, they have arrived at years of discretion. You must not expect them to play ball or anything like that, or run about the garden with you. They are, what shall we say, a little sober in temperament." but excellent creatures, nevertheless, excellent creatures. You will get on very well together, I'm sure, with a little give and take on both sides. Just a minute, father, pleaded Ella. Do tell me some more about my new sisters. I cannot understand all the big words you use. Do you mean that they are grown up? Her father nodded. In point of fact, adult, he said, and his tone was so gloomy that Ella had to smile. Never mind, she said. Some grown-ups are very nice, especially if they know stories or can play pretend games, as mother used to do. Can Charlotte or Euphronia play pretend games, do you know? Let me see, said her father. Charlotte plays the spinet very nicely, I believe. Her mother tells me so. I have not heard her much myself because I do not care for music, and I always shut the library door when she begins to play. Euphronia? Let me see. What is it Euphronia does? Oh, of course, Euphronia sings. I gather from her mother that she is no mean performer, though I am no judge of these things. But here we are at the house, child, so do not ask any more questions. In a few minutes you shall meet your stepmother and your sisters in person. Whenever his stepdaughter begins to play, he shuts the library door. That's not, hmm, interesting. We are on to chapter 3, The Homecoming. Half an hour later, Ella sat alone in the middle of the big drawing room, feeling very unhappy. She had not yet seen her stepmother or her stepsisters, who were out visiting, but she had found many traces of their presence in the house. First of all, when she had gone up to her own room, she found to her dismay that somebody else had been using it. All her pictures had been taken down from the walls and replaced by ugly steel engravings. The cupboard containing her toys was nowhere to be seen, and in its place stood a tall swinging mirror. The window seat where she had used to sit curled up on wet days reading a storybook or looking out into the garden was not there either. Nor were the pretty chintz curtains. Instead of the latter, the window was draped with an ugly red brocade, so dark and heavy that it made the entire room seem dull. Facing the window was a queerly shaped flat table with a sort of well in it, and in the well were little pots of white powder and some soft stuff that looked like cream and sticks of red paint. There was also a small porcelain box containing little patches cut out of black plaster, which Ella knew ladies stuck on their cheeks when they were going out visiting or to a ball. Besides these, there was a hare's foot for dabbing powder on, and several powder puffs, and half a dozen bottles of scent and pairs of curling tongs, and strangest of all, a bundle of red hair that looked like the front part of a wig, all frizzled up into curls. The room was very untidy, too. Skirts and other articles of clothing were scattered about on the floor, and a hat with a big feather in it was lying on its back, on the back of one of the chairs. The cushions on the divan were all creased and crumpled, and a book lay face down on the carpet, just where it had been thrown when its owner had done with it. Girl, child, not in my house. No way. You treat a book like that, you're gonna see the back of my hand. Jesus. I can't believe somebody would treat a book like that. I guess children act like that though. They if they don't know better. But these are like grown adults, so it's kind of confusing. Ella stood and gazed at all this for some time. Then she heard a step on the stairs, and going to the door saw Belinda, the maid who had come to help her unpack. "Oh, Belinda," said Ella, "what has happened to my room?" "It's not your room any longer, miss," answered Belinda. "Miss Euphronia took such a fancy to it because it was pleasant and had an outlook on the garden, that she has turned it into a dressing room. That's her table over there where she titivates herself. She has taken your room too, and put your things up into the attic." Titivates. That's an interesting word. Hold on. I've never seen that before. Titivates. Titivates. Titivate. Hmm. Pronunciation. Make sure I'm saying that correctly. Titivate. Titivate. Verb used with an object. Titivated, titivating, to make smart or spruce. Used without an object. Titivated, titivating, to make oneself smart or spruce. Spruce? Spruce? Make someone spruce. Make someone a tree? I guess make someone smart or spruce, maybe tidy, neat. Hmm, interesting. Need more context. I shall complain to father, said Ella. It cannot be his will that I should be so slighted, and he will put matters right. I shouldn't count too much on that if I were you, miss, said Belinda. There's changes in your father, too. He's no longer master in his own house, and he's nagged at day and night. Why, the only peace the poor man can get is to shut himself up in his library, and even then the Baroness, here Belinda gave a mighty scornful sniff, goes and disturbs him half a dozen times a day. The poor man wouldn't get his meals if I didn't take them up to him, for he'd rather face a den of roaring lions than the Baroness. Another sniff. And Miss Charlotte and Miss Euphronia across the dinner table, and small blame to him for 3 more disagreeable females it's never been my ill fortune to meet. I shouldn't count too much on your father, not if I were you, miss. You'll just have to grin and bear it and make the best of things. So it was a miserable Ella who went upstairs to the dark attic, which smelt of dust and spiders' webs, and unpacked her trunk beneath the sloping roof. Belinda had made the place look as comfortable as she could, and even nailed up some of the pictures on the walls, but there was hardly room to turn around, and when Ella sat on the bed, her toes almost touched the opposite wall. What a change from the pretty, airy room that had once been her own. Mind you, this house is full of rooms that they could have put her things or even had Euphronia move into. But Euphronia is spiteful and mean and put her things in the attic rather than any other one of the numerous rooms available. I can already tell I'm not going to like this girl. Her eyes were so full of tears that she could hardly see to unpack, but she wiped them away presently, and took out her prettiest dress, a white muslin with blue embroidery on the front, and a wide sash of blue silk. She put this on because she thought she might as well look her best, and went down to the drawing room to wait for her stepmother's return. In a little while she heard the crunching of wheels on the drive outside, and then the banging of the front door, and the sound of high-pitched voices. It seemed as though a quarrel were going on, for the voices were very loud and very bad-tempered. I tell you, he bowed to me. Stuff and nonsense. I'll warrant he never even noticed you. He looked straight at me as he walked by the carriage, and I smiled in return. Forward, creature, when you have never been introduced, minx, cat. And so the two went on, snapping and snarling, until a deeper voice put in, For goodness sakes, stop your bickering, you two, do now, and help me off with this turban. I don't expect he bowed to either of you, and if he did, it doesn't matter, for he's nothing but a country squire's son with not a penny in his pocket. I wonder whether that brat of the Baron's has come home. That's my stepmother, thought Ella, and the Baron's brat is me. Oh dear, I wish I'd stayed at school. She had half a thought of escaping through the French windows into the garden and running away, but before she could move a step, the drawing-room door flew open and in came the Baroness with her 2 daughters. So we are on to chapter 4. Man, just cruising through this story. So here we have a picture. It looks like her father introducing her to the baroness and her two daughters, which, yep, seeing the fairness of Cinderella's face and like the outline, the profile, um, versus the two stepsisters with the bump of a nose and a beak of a nose and like what may or may not a turkey waddle for a throat. Interesting. Chapter 4: The Baroness and Her Daughters. Have you ever noticed that there are some people whom you know you are not going to like the first time you set eyes on them? Well, the Baroness was one of those people, and so were the two sisters. For three more disagreeable looking persons never walked into a room together. The Baroness came first, striding along in a proud and haughty manner, and peering through a pair of tortoiseshell rimmed spectacles, which she carried at the end of a long handle. She was fat and stumpy, with more than one chin, and she had cross, crafty eyes set very close together over a big hooked nose. The fingers of her hands were covered with flashing rings. Someone is knocking at my door. Hmm, interesting. Bear with me a moment. Well, whoever they are, they walked here. How strange. Covered with flashing rings, among which, to her horror, Ella recognized one that had belonged to her mother, and she was dressed in a gown of black and yellow like a gypsy at a fair. Hmm. Ella rose and dropped a curtsy as her father introduced her, while the Baroness stared at her from head to toe through her lorgnette. Am I saying lorgnette? A pair of eyeglasses mounted on a handle. I did not know what that word was. Am I saying that right? No, lorgnette. Lorgnette. So that's French in origin. Interesting. Stared at her from head to toe through her lorgnette. So this is the girl, she said at last in a harsh voice. How do you do, miss? I've heard of your airs and graces and the way you have been molly-coddled, and I want you to understand that sort of thing has come to an end now. You've been to school, I believe. Yes, faltered Ella. Don't they teach you to say madam when you speak to your elders? Who told you to put on that frock? Nobody, said Ella, whose face was red with shame. It is my frock which my father gave to me, and I put it on because I liked it best of all my frocks. Oh, indeed. Then you may go and take it off as quickly as you like, and put on the plainest one you have. I don't like little girls who give themselves airs. Why do you not greet your sisters? Now this was hardly fair, for poor little Ella had not had time to greet anybody, or to do anything except answer questions since her new relations had arrived. Nevertheless, she tried to smile and to appear friendly. How do you do? She said. My father told me about you as we were coming home in the carriage. I think you've got such pretty names, but I don't know yet which is Charlotte and which is Euphronia, so I can't call you by them. Do you hear that, mamma? Cried one of the girls. She actually came home in one of our carriages. I suppose she considers herself too much of a fine lady to walk. The one who spoke was red-haired, and her face was highly rouged and powdered, so Ella judged that it was she who had taken possession of her room. But in spite of her paint and powder, nobody could possibly call this girl handsome. To begin with, she squinted so badly that while one eye was looking at Ella, the gaze of the other was fixed on the corner of the room. Oh no. Oh dear. And as if this was not enough, she had inherited her mother's big hooked nose, which made her face look rather like that of a horse, although no horse could possibly have worn so bad-tempered and discontented an expression. Welcome in, Zeno. We're describing the sisters now. The other sister, who, as Ella afterward learned, was the one named Charlotte, was no beauty either, but she was considerably more attractive than Euphronia, though she had a little red nose that was turned up in the most comical way. Nevertheless, Ella thought that there was just a trace of kindness in Charlotte's look, so she ventured to appeal to her. I am sorry if I did wrong by coming home in the carriage, she said, but my father came to the school for me. Please do not be angry. I will try to please you in the future. Come, come, said the Baron, nervously rubbing his hands. Do not let us begin the quarrel about such a little thing. The child is really not at fault. Hold your tongue, Charles, snapped his wife, and please understand that I will not have the creature pampered. We shall have her demanding a boudoir next, and a servant to wait on her. But, my dear, stammered the Baron. Don't talk to me, cried his wife with an angry stamp of the foot. We shall see whether or not I am to be mistress in my own house. Euphronia, take this naughty girl up into the garret, and lock her in until she comes to her senses. A few days of solitude and a diet of bread and water will do her all the good in the world. That escalated quickly. Come along, you stuck-up little thing, said Euphronia, seizing Ella's wrist with her large, bony hand. You will have to be taught your proper place. And so, Ella was dragged away. At the door she turned an appealing glance towards her father, but he was looking at his toes and made no movement to interfere. The last thing Ella heard as she went up the stairs was the voice of the Baroness storming at her husband. Even when the door of the garret was slammed upon her, she could still hear it, deep and booming like the rumble of distant thunder. I would rather face a pack of lions myself if that is what I got to come home to every day. My goodness. Um, well, before we continue on, it's been a few chapters. As a friendly reminder, be sure. Aloria is rated too. Oh no! I have so many raids today. Oh my goodness. Um, Hello, welcome dear raiders. I am Vexing Cat if you've not been here before. Hi, Aloria. I am doing quite well. We read 4 chapters of Cinderella as told by C.S. Evans so far. The illustrations have been very good, and I am excited to see what changes in this story versus the original Charles Perrault version is. Um, can we get another shout out for? I think I'm should be able to do another one. Can we do a shout out for Aloria too, Valis, when you have a second? My goodness. Mm. Let's see. We'll try it now. It'll probably show their 1.0.
Debbie, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not doing it. Debbie, I went into the flesh.
I don't know what game this
You tell me not to do something, I'm gonna do it.
but that
you
was
should know
definitely
by
the
now.
1.0 model. Yes. Yes, a little bit. A little bit of a jump scare. Which game was that, Aloria? Yeah. What I don't really understand where it pulls the clips from. It just does. Um yes. So, yep. Yep. That was ancient history. If you dear listeners, dear Librophiles, have not seen their stream before, they just debuted a new 2.0 model. Incredible model. Um she looks like bubblegum and with purple hair and is so sweet, but very, very spicy.
Drink
Yes, I will stay
water.
hydrated.
Become moist.
Mm-hmm. All right. Don't no need to be embarrassed. We all start somewhere, Aloria, and that was a good model to begin with. And yours now is incandescent. So, you should be very proud of where you started and where you are now. It looks so good. Aw, thank you. Let's see. We are on to chapter 5, How Ella Became Cinderella. Before I do that, I'll give a quick wipe of my glasses here. Okay. One moment. There we go. How Ella Became Cinderella. So there was poor little Ella in the dark garret at the top of the house, where she remained for 24 hours with no food but bread and water. There was nothing in the room except a straw mattress, which had been turned out of one of the servants' chambers, and on this she lay down, burying her head in her hands, and sobbing as if her heart would break. What hurt her more than anything else was the thought that her father had done nothing to protect her against her stepmother's ill treatment. Same, Bestie, same. She had wild thoughts of running away and going to the town to hire herself as a maid of all work at one of the inns, but the little window of her room was barred on the outside, so she had to perforce to stay where she was until it pleased her captors to come and let her out. Presently it grew dark, and then the loneliness was awful. But Ella shut her eyes and consoled herself by thinking about the happy days she used to spend when her mother was alive. After a time she fell into sleep, and in her dreams it seemed to her as though her mother was standing beside the wretched bed, looking down upon her with eyes of pity and of love. It was Euphronia who came the next day to let Ella out. She threw open the door and stood on the threshold for a time, smiling spitefully. "Well, miss," she said, "and how did you like your bedroom? Did you find it airy and comfortable?" "Why are you so horrid to me?" asked Ella. "I'm sure I've done nothing to deserve it. If you do not like to have me in the house, I will go away and not trouble you any more. Let me go back to school and spend my holidays there, as I have done before." "A splendid idea," mocked Euphronia, "and I've no doubt it is just what you would like. There is to be no more school for you, miss. Too much money has been wasted on you already, and we will certainly spend no more. What does a little chit like you want of learning Italian and history and dancing? You will have to make yourself useful now and do something to earn your keep." If anybody had told Ella a day or two before that she would have been miserable at the idea of not being allowed to go back to school, she would not have believed them. But at these words her heart sank. What further humiliations had fate in store? She was soon to learn, for Euphronia hustled her off into the kitchen and made her sit down at the table with the servants. There she was given a hunk of coarse bread and a mugful of milk, and told to eat heartily, because that was all she would get until the following morning. She learnt, too, that she was not even to have the attic where she had unpacked her clothes, but was to sleep henceforth in the very garret where she had been imprisoned, on that ragged straw mattress that had not been good enough for a scullion. "Oh, Belinda," sobbed Ella, when her sister at last had gone away, "I am the most unhappy girl in all the world. Whatever shall I do?" "Put a bold face on it, missy," said Belinda, "and keep up your courage. Perhaps they don't mean all they say, and will be kinder to you when they have worked off their spite. At any rate, nothing is to be gained by crying your pretty eyes out." "You will be good to me, won't you, Belinda?" and let me stay here. I never want to go upstairs again while my stepmother and my stepsisters are in the house. We can be quite cozy together, and I'll help you all I can and teach you some of the things I have learnt at school." "That would be very nice, Missy," answered Belinda, "and you may stay here and welcome, but I'm afraid you won't have my company because I'm leaving at the end of the week. All the house servants are under notice to leave. The mistress says she means to economize and to stop the waste that has been going on for years. I expect she wants the money to buy jewels to hang on herself and her ugly daughters. Ugh, the nasty creatures." And Belinda shook her head and walked away, muttering. Ella was very dejected at the prospect of losing one whom she had come to consider her only friend in the world. But before a week had gone by, she discovered that Belinda's words were only too true. One by one the servants left, until there was nobody left in the kitchen but Ella herself and a little scullery maid, who sniffed all day long through her nose and walked about on shoes that had no heels. Now Ella discovered what her stepsister had meant when she said that she had got to learn to make herself useful. For a day or two she was left to do as she liked, and then one morning Euphronia came down to the kitchen and found her sitting at the window reading a book. "Well, I never!" cried Euphronia. "So that's how you spend your time. Come here at once and put on this coarse apron and then go down on your knees and scrub the floor." "I am doing no harm," said Ella mildly. "Mother always used to let me read in the morning after my lessons were done. As for the floor, it's quite clean, for the scullery maid has only just finished scrubbing it. Please, Euphronia, let me go on with my work." "What? What?" screamed Euphronia, working herself up into a fine rage. "More airs and graces! Take that, you miserable brat, and that for daring to be impudent to your betters." And with her great hard hand she struck poor Ella several blows on the cheek. Then the poor girl was locked up in the garret once more, and almost starved until her spirit was broken. Things went on in this way for over a month, during which Ella never saw her father or her stepmother. Euphronia was her task mistress, and she seemed to take a delight in heaping insults and cruelties upon Ella's head. Sometimes Charlotte came down into the kitchen and stood watching while Ella cleaned the silver, or did some similar menial work, but she did not say anything, except a quarrel with her elder sister, in which occupation these two amiable beings seemed to pass the greater part of their time. Little by little, Ella became accustomed to her new position, and took up more and more of the duties of the kitchen maid. Early in the morning she would rise from her bed and go downstairs to rake out the grates and light the fires. Then she would wash up the greasy crockery left over from the previous night's dinner, and sweep the kitchen floor, and prepare a dish of tea to take up to her stepsisters, who always lay abed until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. Euphronia looked so funny in bed with her false curls off and her bald forehead showing that Ella felt very much inclined to laugh. But she dared not for fear of a beating. Both the sisters were lazybones, and even when they did arouse themselves to get up, they would walk about the house in their wrappers, with untidy, down at heel slippers on their feet. Ella grew to hate the sound of their footsteps, slip slop, over the polished floors. When her frugal breakfast was done, Ella began the work of the day. Sometimes it was the stairs that had to be brushed down, or the bedrooms to be turned out, or the drawing room to be cleaned. All the bedrooms had parquet floors, which Ella had to polish on her hands and knees until she could see her face in them. Very hard work it was, and her delicate little hands, which had once been so soft and white, grew coarse and hard. From morning till night she was kept busy, with hardly a moment to rest except at meal times. Only after dinner in the evening had she an hour or two to herself, and then she used to go and sit in the big open fireplace on a low stool close to the smoldering wood cinders, and with her head resting on her hands think of her hard lot and of the happy days that were gone by. During the first 6 months she had no companion except the little scullery maid, who always seemed to have a cold in her nose, and who was not very good company at the best of times. When the maid left, Ella was allowed to go into the drawing room now and then to read to the sisters, or to do a bit of embroidery. I hope, child, said Mistress Euphronia on one of these occasions, that you realize how fortunate you are in being allowed to improve your mind by reading books and by listening to good music. By good music, she meant her singing to Charlotte's accompaniment on the harpsichord. She made the most dreadful noises. But I'll warrant, she went on, that you are much happier downstairs with your pots and pans or sitting among the cinders. Come, confess now, are you not happier so? Yes, said Ella quietly. For some reason, this reply seemed to make Euphronia very angry, and the next night, when Ella went up into the drawing room, she said with a spiteful smile, I have found a new name for you. In future I shall call you Cinder Slut. Cinder Slut? Wow. Cinder Slut. I shall call you Cinder Slut because of your nasty habit of sitting among the cinders. Come, Cinder Slut, and hold the skein of wool for me. At this, Ella flushed, and was about to make an angry reply when Charlotte, who was never quite so unkind to her as her other sister, said, No, no, sister, let us call her Cinderella. That sounds much better. And Cinderella it was from that time forward. Euphronia just went for the throat, like Cinder Slut? Really? Wow. Wow. Very different book. Chapter 6. The Invitation. Things went on in this way for more than 2 years, and during all that time Cinderella seldom spoke to her father. Substantially changed, Fallen, absolutely. There was no doubt that he knew how his little daughter was being treated, but he gave no sign that he knew or that he tried to prevent it. The fact is, he was so much afraid of his new wife that he dared not say a word. He shut himself up in his library, more and more, and Cinderella heard from her stepsisters that he was engaged in writing a book. Likewise, Zeno, thank you for the lurk. It's all about the Greeks, said Euphronia. Nasty, unfashionable creatures who lived in tubs and went about with lanterns looking for honest people. I think she was thinking of the story of Diogenes, which Cinderella had told her one day when the name came up in the course of her reading from a news sheet. But can you understand such ignorance? Once the Baron came out of his room while Cinderella was brushing the stairs. He put his hand on her head, as he used to do in the old days, and looked as if he were going to say something. But the sound of his wife's footsteps on the stairs startled him, and he scuttled back to his room like a frightened rabbit. Cinderella was now 16 years of age, and in spite of her hard life had grown to be a very beautiful girl. Her pretty clothes had long ago worn out, or become too small for her, and she had had to dress in odds and ends which were left off by her sisters. This would not have mattered very much if the clothes had been in good taste, for it was quite possible to look well even if one's clothes are shabby, but both the sisters had a liking for violent colors and tasteless finery. Thus, for instance, Euphronia would come down in the evening in a gown of yellow covered with black stripes, which made her look like a zebra. You can imagine the effect of it in contrast with her red hair and painted cheeks. Charlotte, on the other hand, loved purple and green, and she would produce the most astonishing effects by mixing these two colors. Nothing was ever given to Cinderella until it was almost in rags, and she had had the greatest difficulty in keeping herself respectable. In spite of her ragged clothes, however, she always managed to look 1,000 times more beautiful than the sisters. And now we come to the turning point of Cinderella's life. You remember the handsome young prince whom Ella had once seen driving with the king and queen along the road that had ran past the house. He had now reached the age of 21 years, and on the occasion of his birthday, There were to be great festivities. Cinderella heard all about it from her sisters. 4 weeks before, they had talked of nothing else in the evenings when Cinderella went into the drawing room. They even neglected their music, and were so excited that they stopped in the middle of the most fascinating novel they were reading. The novel was about a poor but noble young man who was dispossessed of his rightful inheritance by a wicked uncle, and it always made Euphronia cry. They say that the whole town is to be illuminated, said Charlotte, and the fountains are going to run with wine, so that the common people can enjoy themselves. I don't see why the common people need to enjoy themselves, said Euphronia with a sniff. The prince would so much better the prince would do so much better to devote his attention to the fashionable folk and the gentry. What do a lot of greasy peasants and shopkeepers want with illuminations and fountains running wine? Every boy child in the town is to have a present, Charlotte went on, and every girl child a doll. That is by the prince's own wish, for he is very fond of children. Sentimental nonsense, cried Euphronia, tossing her head. And there are to be a series of grand balls at the palace, to which all the best people in the country are to be invited. We shall get an invitation, of course, for we are very important people. Yes, replied Euphronia, we shall certainly receive an invitation. And she was right, for one afternoon a courier from the palace came riding to the house and delivered the invitation in a large envelope, sealed with the royal seal. Now, what a scene of excitement there was! The sisters spent half the day talking about what they were going to wear, and the other half grimacing before their looking glasses. All the dresses were brought out of the wardrobe, and Cinderella was called upstairs to admire them and to give her advice. I think I shall wear my red velvet gown with the English point lace trimmings, said Euphronia. That is so dignified and stately, and it suits me admirably. As for me, said Charlotte, I shall put on my purple petticoat and my green cloak that is brocaded in gold. Purple, you know, is the royal color, and is therefore most appropriate for a royal ball. Then they put the dresses on, and stalked about the room in them, posturing before the mirrors, and practicing graceful bows and curtsies. At all hours of the day, errand boys came from the shops in the town carrying parcels, new shawls and lace kerchiefs and fancy shoes, bottles containing toilet water and scent, boxes of black patches from the best makers and of the latest shape, fans and gloves and jeweled clasps. One could have thought that there were 50 people in the house who were going to the ball instead of only 2. Cinderella was kept busy from morning till night, ironing the sisters' linen and goffering their ruffles. Goffering? Goffering. Goffering. A decorative ornamental frill, ruffle, etc. Goffering. Goffering. The more you know, that's like 3 words. My goodness. Ironing the sisters' linen and goffering their ruffles. There is Cinderella there, ironing diligently with the cat nearby. Here we have various looking glasses and various petticoats strewn about, Euphronia on the left, and I'm assuming that's Charlotte on the right. Here they are getting changed behind the screen. When the great day arrived, Cinderella was called upstairs to help the sisters dress. The ball did not begin until 7 o'clock in the evening, but they began their preparations immediately after breakfast, and even rose at 8 o'clock, which was a thing they had never done before in all their lives. Cinderella found their room in the most hopeless confusion. There were hats and feathers on the bed, skirts and petticoats of different colors strewed all over the floor, pins and curling tongs and bottles on the toilet table, and jewel cases on the chairs. Euphronia was sitting before the mirror, trying to arrange her hair over a great frame that rose a foot above her forehead. And as there was so little of it, she was having considerable difficulty. She was already dressed in her red velvet gown with green stockings, and gold shoes, my God. And she looked rather like a very large and brilliantly colored cockatoo. Welcome in, Bone Collar. Enjoy your lyric. Oh, poor Cinderella. Just, that's a whole day of just, ugh. On the other side of the room, Charlotte was engaged in lacing her bodice, and had already broken a dozen laces in the attempt to make her waist smaller than nature ever intended it to be. "Come here, you lazy little thing," screamed Euphronia as soon as Cinderella entered the room. "Come and hold these pins for me while I dress my hair. A plague on the hairdresser who sent me this cream, for it won't keep a curl in its place. I'm driven nearly distracted." "Would you like me to dress your hair for you?" asked Cinderella. "I'm sure I could do it if you would let me try." "No, no," cried Charlotte. "I want Cinderella to come and pull these laces a little tighter. This bodice will close quite another inch with a careful coaxing." Oh, oh dear. "Oh, you abominably selfish creature, you know very well that all the tugging in the world will not make you look genteel. It is only wasting time, and my hair must be done, or I shall be late for the ball." And so they began one of their quarrels, and Cinderella had to soothe them by offering to do Euphronia's hair first, and to lace Charlotte afterwards. Euphronia, beneath her deft fingers, the unruly tresses soon fell into shape, and Euphronia, watching the happy result of her work in the mirror, grew quite gracious. "That's very becoming," she said, stretching her lean neck this way and that. "Auburn hair is quite the fashion this year, according to the court intelligencer. I'm positive that I shall create a great sensation. Don't you wish that you were going to the ball with us, Cinderella?" "Why do you make fun of me?" said Cinderella sadly. "You know very well that such things are not for me." "You are right," cried Euphronia with a spiteful laugh. "Fancy a cinder slut at the prince's ball! How everybody would laugh!" Cinderella felt very much inclined to give her stepsister's hair a tug, or at the very least to dress it awry, but she controlled herself with an effort, and went on quietly with her task. "They say," remarked Charlotte, who was carefully fixing a patch shaped into a coach and four on her cheek, "they say that the prince is to choose a bride from among the high-born ladies who will be present at the ball. Oh, sister, suppose it should be me!" "Pooh, what nonsense!" replied Euphronia with a giggle. How do you get such fancies in your head? The prince would be just as likely to choose Cinderslut here. Besides, he has dark hair and eyes, and it is well known that dark people always prefer women who are blonde and have a touch of color in their complexion." "By what measure? I... okay." And in another minute they were at it again, quarreling, hammer and tongs, so that Cinderella's head nearly burst with the din. At last, however, everything was ready. The carriage came to the door, and they drove away, leaving poor Cinderella gazing sadly out of the window after them. All right, before we start another chapter, we're running out of time before ads come and take us away. So I'll go ahead and do a quick ad break here. I'm going to use the restroom, refill my water bottle, and I will be back. So hang tight. We'll just do 3 minutes of ads and get it out of the way. And when we come back, we'll continue with Chapter 7. let's see here. Okay, we are returning to Cinderella, as retold by Charles Seddon Evans and illustrated by Arthur Rackham. Welcome back, dear viewers. Hopefully I didn't make you wait too long. Nice full water bottle. Okay. We return to Chapter 7, The Fairy Godmother. So, as a friendly reminder, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to relax and enjoy the story. I love how the fairy godmother appears to be riding on a walking stick. Oh, okay. Fantastic. Cinderella followed the carriage with her eyes until it was out of sight, and then she descended to the kitchen and took up her usual place in the corner of the fireplace. She felt very miserable as she sat there in the chimney corner. She was of a brave disposition, and she had learned not to show her feelings in the presence of her stepsisters. But as she contrasted their good fortune with her hard and miserable life, she could not help crying. By this time they were in the great hall of the palace, mingling with a crowd of gaily dressed and happy people, beneath the light of 1,000 candles, while she sat there in the dingy kitchen, with no one to talk to, and only her sad thoughts for occupation. A tear fell down her nose and splashed onto the hearthstone, and then another and another. All of a sudden, Cinderella heard a noise. She nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw the figure of an old woman standing in the shadow on the other side of the hearth place. "Who are you?" asked Cinderella in a quavering voice. "Don't be afraid," said the woman. "I have not come to do you any harm. You have seen me before once upon a time, when you were even more unhappy than you are tonight. Look at me well, and see if you do not remember." Then the strange old woman stepped forward into the light. She was very, very old, so old that her face was a maze of lines like a wrinkled apple. She was dressed in a very full red petticoat and a black laced bodice, and on her head was a queerly shaped hat with a highly pointed crown and a wide brim. There she stood, leaning heavily on a big crooked stick, while Cinderella gazed at her and wondered where she had seen her before. And then the woman smiled. Have you ever seen a ray of sunshine light up the shadows of a gloomy place? Well, the strange woman's smile was like that. She no longer appeared old, but as young and radiant as a spring morning, and her eyes glowed deep and pure and true. I know," cried Cinderella. "You are the woman who was in the garden that night when my mother died. The moon pointed you out to me, and I wanted to come down to you, but when I looked again, you had disappeared." "Because the time was not ripe," said the woman. "You only saw me that once, but many is the time that I have seen you. I have watched you at your work day after day, and I know all that you have endured through the malice of your stepmother and your stepsisters. At night, when you sat here brooding among the cinders and thought yourself all alone, I was never very far away. When you went to your garret and lay down on your straw bed, it was I who watched over your sleep." "Why?" said Cinderella. "Who then can you be? Your mother and I were friends when she was a girl, and I promised her before she died that I would make your welfare my care. You were crying when I came in. Tell me, what is the matter?" "It was nothing," said Cinderella, who was just a little ashamed at having been discovered in tears. I wanted... You wanted to go to the ball. Isn't that it?" "Yes," said Cinderella with a sigh. "Well, if you will be a good girl and do what I tell you, and don't ask any questions, you shall go." "Have you a pumpkin bed in the garden?" Why, yes, said Cinderella wonderingly. Then go to it at once and bring me the biggest pumpkin you can find. Now don't stop to ask me why, but just do as I say, and you will discover the reason quickly enough. Cinderella ran into the garden at once and soon came back with a fine pumpkin, which she gave to her godmother, wondering the while how such a thing was going to help her to go to the ball. Now a knife, if you please. Cinderella brought a knife, with which her godmother cut off the top of the pumpkin and scooped out the pulp until nothing was left but the hollow rind. Then she took outside into the courtyard and touched with her stick, when the pumpkin immediately changed into a most magnificent coach, all glass above and gilded panels below. Now Cinderella realized that her godmother was a fairy, and if there was a more surprised and delighted girl in the whole country that night, I have yet to hear of her. She could not resist peeping inside the coach, which was upholstered with delicate rose-colored silk, and she was so excited that her godmother had to touch her on the arm to bring her to herself. Come along, said the old woman, or the ball will be over before you get there. I want a mouse or two. Run and see if there are any in the trap. Cinderella hastened into the kitchen and found that by the greatest good luck there were 6 live mice in the trap. They were, running round and round the wire cage and poking their little black muzzles through the bars. Open the trap just a little, said the old woman, and let them run out one by one. Then, as each mouse came out, she gave it a little tap with her stick, and each mouse was immediately changed into a fine horse. When she had finished, there was a train of handsome steeds, all of dappled mouse gray color, and so well trained that they immediately placed themselves between the shafts of the carriage, ready to be harnessed into place. Now we shall want a coachman, said the old woman when this was done. What are we going to do for him, I wonder? I know, said Cinderella. Perhaps there is a rat in the rat trap. If so, he'll make a very good coachman. I'll go and see. Once again, fortune favored her. There was no less than 3 large rats in the rat trap, and that was a very unusual thing. A very fine selection, said the fairy godmother, looking them over. We'll have this fat fellow, because he has such a splendid set of whiskers. Let him out carefully. She touched the rat with her wand, and before Cinderella's eyes he grew taller and gradually changed shape. Here is the fairy godmother here, transforming the rat, and Cinderella going, oh my! It's a good picture. First of all, his hind legs became a pair of shapely legs, clad in a pair of most elegant grey breeches. Then his tail shriveled up and turned into the tail of a fine grey livery coat. The last part of him to change was his head, so that the rat could watch the strange things that were happening to his person. You never saw a more surprised-looking rat in your life. However, there he stood at last, the most dignified and solemn-looking coachman that ever sat on a box seat, and his whiskers were a real wonder to behold. With such a fine coach and 6 you must have some footmen, the godmother said. Go into the garden again and look behind the big watering pot that stands beside the fountain. There you will find 6 lizards. Catch them and bring them to me, but mind you don't catch hold of their tails, because if you do, the tails will come off in your hand, and in that case your footmen will have no coats to their backs, and the lizards would have no tails. I'm just saying. The lizards were behind the watering pot, just as the old woman had said, and fine, plump fellows they were. Very soon they were turned into 6 footmen, all as like each other as 6 peas in a pod, and all dressed in a showy livery of grey and gold. They did not need to be taught their duties, but jumped up behind the coach and held on to the rail there just as if they had done nothing else all their lives. So that is finished, said the fairy godmother with a smile. I like her thumb is outstretched, like, hey, get over there! Hey, you, lizard boy, go, go. There is no lady at the prince's ball tonight who will arrive in finer equipage than you. Are you not pleased? Yes, answered Cinderella, but am I to go to the ball in these shabby old clothes? Everybody would stare at me. Bless my soul, I forgot all about the dress. She really doesn't. She's like, get over there. I don't have any time for that. Bless my soul, I forgot all about the dress, cried the old woman. But that is easily attended to. She touched Cinderella lightly on the shoulder with her stick, and immediately her dingy gown was changed into a magnificent dress of white silk, embroidered with butterflies and flowers of delicate blue, and sewn with seed pearls. Round her neck was a necklace of pearls and diamonds, and great wonder of all, on her tiny feet was a pair of glass shoes, the prettiest that ever were seen. Now you are all ready, said the kind godmother, who had worked all these marvels. Step into the coach and drive away. But before you go, take careful heed of what I say. You may dance and enjoy yourself to your heart's content until midnight. But on the stroke of 12 you must leave the ballroom and come home. If you remain even a minute longer, your coach will become a pumpkin, your horses mice, your coachman a rat, and your footmen lizards, while your pretty gown will change back again into your shabby old dress. That will not be nice for you to have such things happening in everybody's sight, so remember my warning. Cinderella promised her godmother that she would not fail to act upon her advice, and stepping into her coach drove off, almost beside herself with joy. Here's the full carriage. I don't even see how there would be room for that many footmen, honestly. But so we have the rat there on the box seat, the mice that have been turned into the horses, a footman over on the left. I'm guessing that might be Lupin up there in the top left corner with the shape of the leaves, but I'm not positive. But this is a really beautifully done image. So the fairy godmother with her crooked stick, and then Cinderella with her dressed up white silk dress and feathers in her hair, apparently, climbing into the coach. Chapter 8. The Ball. The Ball. Away went the grand coach, down the drive and through the lodge gates, which were standing wide open, and out on the wide road that led to the town. The 6 grey horses stepped as proudly as any steeds in the king's own stable. The coachman sat on the box, as dignified as an emperor, and all the 6 footmen clung on behind and called out, "Make way! Make way!" Through the town they clattered, to the amazement and joy of all the folk who were making holiday. The housewives came to their windows to see, and the citizens waved their caps in the air and shouted out, "Hurrah!" They thought that Cinderella was a princess, or a duchess, at least. That, too, was the opinion of the ushers when the carriage drew up before the palace gates. The ushers came out to ask the name of the new guest, but Cinderella told her footman to say that she wished her name to be kept secret. At this the ushers were puzzled and did not know what to do, so they brought the court chamberlain, who came out with his gold stick of office in his hand, but had to retire no wiser than he came. In his turn, the chamberlain informed the young prince, whose curiosity was so strongly aroused that he descended in person to see who this mysterious guest could be. As soon as he saw Cinderella, he was so overcome by her beauty that he forgot all else, and handing her down from the carriage, escorted her into the ballroom on his arm. And now, what a sight of met Cinderella's eyes. Many a time since the invitation to the ball had come, she had tried to picture the splendors of the scene. But the reality was even more wonderful than her dreams. The great hall was lighted by 1,000 candles set in the chandeliers of cut glass that shimmered and sparkled with all the hues of the rainbow. The room was so big that one could hardly see the end of it, and the floor was polished to such a degree that it reflected the light of the candles and the gay colors of the dancers' costumes. All the guests were assembled, the fiddlers were playing merrily, and the king and queen themselves had stepped out to lead the dance. The entrance of Cinderella on the prince's arm made a great sensation. That must be the king and the queen there down at the bottom. Everybody stopped dancing to look at her, and even the fiddlers, amazed at her beauty, forgot to play and sat gaping in surprise. The king, old as he was, could not take his eyes off her, and was heard to say to the queen that it was a long time since he had seen anybody so lovely. "Will you not tell me your name, sweet lady?" whispered the prince, as he led her forward to present her to his father and mother. But Cinderella shook her head and told him that she was under a vow. So the prince, who was very polite and amiable, was content and did not ask her again. He thought that she was certainly a lady of very high rank, not only because of the magnificence of her carriage and the richness of her costume, but also because she was so beautiful and well-mannered. Anybody could see she was nobly born. So she was presented to the king and queen by the name which the prince made up for the occasion, and they were delighted with her and spoke to her very graciously. Then the music began again, and the prince bowed before her and asked her if he might have an honor of a dance. Now what would have happened to Cinderella if she had not profited by her dancing lessons at school? One never knows how soon the time may come when one will be glad of one's accomplishments. As it was, there was no lady in the hall who could dance more gracefully than she. Her little feet, clad in the shimmering glass slippers, tripped the measure as lightly as though they were treading on air. It was a joy to see her. Meanwhile, all the guests were asking each other questions. "Oh, how lovely she is," said one. "Who can she be?" "She must be some princess from foreign parts," said another, "for she certainly does not belong to any of the families of the province." "Send a lackey down to the courtyard," said another, "and let him look at that coat of arms on her carriage panels. That will tell us what we want to know." This was done, but the carriage panels were not ornamented with any device, so the inquisitive guests were no wiser. Still others followed Cinderella with their eyes and took careful note of her costume. "Whoever can her dressmaker be?" they said. "Did you ever see such a wonderful fit and style? I must certainly copy that dress for my next ball, although I am afraid the material must be very costly." And so they continued to chatter to one another, while Cinderella, though she could not help hearing some of their remarks, carried herself so simply and modestly that all hearts went out to her. Almost as soon as she had entered the ballroom, she had caught a glimpse of her stepsisters, craning their necks to gaze at her from behind the last row of the guests. And now she saw them again, sitting rather disconsolately against the wall, for nobody wanted to dance with such disagreeable-looking creatures. Dance succeeded dance, and the prince never once left Cinderella's side. He seemed to have no eyes for anybody else, and quite neglected his other guests. Halfway through the evening, Cinderella said to him, "Tell me, prince, who are those two ladies sitting over there in the alcove by the pillar? Poor things! They have not been asked to dance once the whole evening. I feel quite sorry for them." The prince gave a careless glance at Charlotte and Euphronia, who indeed looked very sour and miserable. "I do not know their names," said he, "but they are probably the daughters of one of the neighboring squires. If you like, I will send the master of the ceremonies to find them partners." "Do so, if you please," said Cinderella, "for I am sure they are not enjoying themselves at all, and that is a pity when everybody should be so happy." "You are as good and as kind-hearted as you are beautiful," said the prince as he went away to give the necessary orders. But did not say it aloud, though he was longing to tell Cinderella how much he admired her. In this way, the two stepsisters found partners at last, and they never knew that it was to Cinderella that they owed their good fortune. Their plain faces glowed with pleasure when two noble gentlemen led them out to dance the cotillion, and though, if truth be told, they danced it very badly, they were quite unaware of it, for their partners were far too polite to show any annoyance at their clumsiness. Presently, a magnificent supper was served in the banqueting hall of the palace. That was a wonderful feast. Cinderella had never seen the like of it in all her life. The table was loaded with the rarest and costliest dishes. There were great boar's heads swimming in gravy on silver platters, with their eyes and tusks shining like life, and lemons in their mouths. There were great joints of beef and venison, each large enough to feed a family, and pies out of which live birds flew when the crust was opened, and just like the pie in the nursery rhyme. There were cakes all covered with icing and shaped like castles or ships, and stands heaped high with the most delicious fruits. Cinderella managed to seat herself opposite her sisters. They had not the slightest idea who she was, for they had only seen her dressed in rags or odds and ends, with the marks of her menial toil about her. If anybody had told them that the lovely lady, the belle of the ball, was the despised cinder slut from their own kitchen, they would never have believed it. Every time I say the word cinder slut, it is the most absurd thing I think I've said in quite some time. Cinderella went out of her way to be amiable with her sisters, and they were very proud of the attention she paid them. Many a girl, remembering their spiteful ways, would have taken advantage of her position to get her revenge, but not so Cinderella, who was good-natured and bore no malice. "Will you not have some of these delicious citrons?" she said, when one of the servants brought her the fruit in the silver basket. And whenever any special delicacy was brought to her, she insisted upon sharing it with them. After the banquet, dancing began again, and the prince, who had hardly eaten a morsel, so absorbed was he in gazing at Cinderella's beauty, renewed his attentions to her. Cinderella was so happy that the hours passed like minutes, and almost before she knew it the night slipped away. Suddenly, however, she heard the great clock in the tower chime out 11:15, and she remembered her godmother's warning. She rose immediately, and making a deep curtsy of farewell, told the prince that the time had come for her to depart. He pressed her to stay another hour, another 5 minutes even, but she would not, and hastening down the stairs, jumped into the coach which was already waiting for her, and gave the word to drive away. The horses galloped like the wind and reached the house only just in time, for just as she was entering, the clock struck 12. Immediately the coach vanished, and nothing was to be seen but the hollow rind of a pumpkin lying on the flagstones. The coachman with the whiskers turned into a rat again. The horses became mice, and the footmen lizards. The little creatures scampered away in all directions until not a tail of them was to be seen, and Cinderella stood there at the kitchen door once again, attired in her ragged clothes. That was a pretty epic way to go. She's like, "Deuces, gotta go," and away she went. Oh my goodness. A little over halfway through the book. Whew! Got this. Okay. We're on to chapter 9. The second night. There's more than one?
Don't forget to stretch!
You got it. Stretch. Yep, big stretch. And hydration while I'm at it.
Drink water.
Yep.
Become moist.
Every time. You got it. Baby, you got it. One of these days, maybe we'll do a karaoke night or something. Let's see. We're on to chapter 9, The Second Night. Cinderella went into the kitchen where her godmother was waiting for her. So there you are, said the old woman. I was just getting anxious about you. I thought you might have been tempted to disregard my warning, which would have been a great disaster. Did you enjoy yourself at the ball? Oh, godmother, cried Cinderella, her eyes sparkling. It was lovely, and I would have liked to stay there forever. The prince was so kind to me and paid me such honor that one would have thought I was the greatest lady in the land. There is to be another ball tomorrow night, and the prince has invited me. I should so much like to go. Well, we will see about that, said her godmother, but be very careful what you say to your stepsisters. Do not let your excitement run away with you, or you will spoil everything. Yes, godmother. Just then there came a loud knocking at the door. It was the sisters returning. The old woman stepped back and vanished up the chimney, and Cinderella ran to let the sisters in. Hi-ho, she said, rubbing her eyes. Or hey-ho? Hey-ho, she said, rubbing her eyes and yawning as though she had just awakened from sleep. How late you are. You must be tired out. Tired, do you say? Said Euphronia. If you had been to the ball, child, I'll warrant you would be less sleepy than you are. But there, she continued with a scornful sniff, what can one expect a kitchen wench to know of the doings of high life? I suppose it was very wonderful, said Cinderella humbly. Yes, indeed, said Charlotte. There came to the ball the most beautiful princess that ever was seen, and she paid us great attentions, I can tell you. She talked to us for the greater part of the evening, and even sat opposite to us at supper, and gave us oranges and citrons. Do tell me about her, said Cinderella in great delight. What was her name, and how was she dressed? That is the strange part of it, said Charlotte. Nobody knew who she was or whence she came, though it was plain to see that she was a very grand princess. The king's son was very puzzled about it, and we heard him say after she had gone that he would give all he had in the world to know her name. As for her dress, I cannot even begin to describe it. It was just a little bit too plain and lacking in color for my taste, but the material was certainly most costly, and the fashion highly original. Oh dear, sighed Cinderella, I do wish I could see her. Will you not let me go with you tomorrow night? I could wear the yellow dress of Euphronia's if she would lend it to me. What? Screamed Euphronia. I never. Huh. It's kind of a weird place to put the break. So here we have the fairy godmother going up the chimney, and then the two sisters coming into the scullery room, I guess. I have never heard such impudence in my life. Lend you my yellow dress, indeed, I like that. Besides, it would be an insult to such a grand company to have a wretched cinder slut among them at the ball. The princess would never speak to us again. Cinderella made no reply, and to tell the truth, she was delighted by Euphronia's refusal to lend her the gown. If she had it, she would not have known what to do with it. The next day the sisters slept very late, and even Cinderella did not rise till past her usual hour. When breakfast was over, another scene of excitement began, for the sisters had to dress themselves for the second ball, and both of them wanted their dresses altered as much in the style of the strange princess's gown as possible. Cinderella, of course, knew better than either of them what that style was, but nothing she could do was right, and she was very glad when, at last, the time came to them to go and she was alone in the house. It was 7:15, and as yet there was no sign of her godmother. Anxiously, Cinderella watched the clock, the hands of which had never seemed to move so slowly before, and she was just beginning to despair of the old woman's coming when she heard a cough behind her and turned quickly. and turning quickly, saw her standing in the doorway. "Ha ha!" said the old woman, smiling. "You were getting impatient, I see. Well, well, I will not chide you. You have got the pumpkin rind and the mousetrap and all the rest of the things." "Yes, yes, here they are," cried Cinderella, "all except the lizards. I will go and fetch them at once. Here are 6 more mice in the trap, and a rat that will make a most magnificent coachman. Oh, godmother, how good you are to me!" She danced with joy as the old woman, with a touch of her stick, caused the great coach and horses, the portly coachman, and the lackeys to appear. Last of all, she received a touch on the shoulder herself, and her rags gave place to a dress that was even more magnificent than the one she had worn on the previous night. This time it was the palest yellow silk, shaded in color like a tea rose, and the glass shoes on her feet were delicately edged with gold. Once again the old woman warned her not on any account to stay at the palace after 12 o'clock, for on the last stroke of the hour all her beautiful things would change back again, and she would appear as a mere kitchen maid garbed in rags. Cinderella promised to give heed to her words and drove away. When she arrived at the palace, she found the prince already waiting for her, all on fire with impatience, for he had begun to fear that she was not coming. As before, he led her into the ballroom on his arm, and gave her the place of honor among his guests. All the evening he never left her side, and he whispered 1,000 tender things to her as he sat beneath the palms on the terrace. Here she is, running away. Ooh, this is of things to come, because she clearly has both of her shoes. So, the king, the queen with her fan, the prince running after her, the guests, her sisters, maybe, sitting in the background. It's kind of hard to tell. "You are the lady of my heart," said he. "Why are you so cruel to me that you will not even tell me your name?" Cinderella was silent, but she could not help wondering what the prince would say if he could see her at home in her dingy kitchen, washing up the greasy crockery or scrubbing the floor. So the time passed very pleasantly, amid 1,000 delights, and Cinderella quite forgot her godmother's warning. Suddenly, she was horrified to hear the big clock in the tower strike the first note of 12. With a cry of alarm, she sprang to her feet, and without even pausing to say goodbye, rushed out of the ballroom, down the steps of the terrace, and into the palace garden. So great was her haste that one of her glass slippers came off, and she did not even notice her loss. 4, 5, 6 chimed the clock, and Cinderella ran as she had never run before. She lost herself in the shrubberies and found her way out again, blundered among the flower beds and snapped the roses from their stalks in the speed of her flight. 7, 8, 9, she crossed a lawn and found herself on a wide drive bordered by trees, which she knew must lead to the palace gates. 10, 11, 12. And on the stroke of 12, her beautiful gown changed into the ragged dress of a kitchen maid. All that remained of her finery was one glass slipper, which she took off and hid carefully away. A few minutes afterwards, the guards at the palace gate saw the figure of a poorly dressed girl flit by. They wondered who she could be, and what she was doing in the grounds at that hour, but the matter seemed very unimportant, and they had all had a good supper, so they did not bother to go after her to ask questions. Cinderella ran all the way home, and arrived at last panting and breathless, just in time to open the door for the sisters. She asked them whether they had enjoyed themselves as much as on the previous night, and whether the beautiful princess had been at the ball. They told her all about it, not because they wished to please her, for, as Euphronia said, it was a mere waste of time to talk to a kitchen slut like Cinderella about such fashionable doings, but because they were so excited that they simply had to talk to somebody. "And what do you think?" said Charlotte, after her sister had related how the princess, on the stroke of 12, had rushed away, leaving her slipper behind. What do you think? The prince kept that slipper in his hand all the rest of the evening, and I saw him kiss it when he thought nobody was looking. Kiss it because it was the only thing left of his, unnamed princess, or does he have a foot fetish? We shall never know. Foolish creature, cried Euphronia with a toss of her head. I do not know about that, remarked Charlotte. It is plain to see that the prince loves that beautiful lady, and will never be happy until he finds her again. At these words the tears filled Cinderella's eyes, and she had to turn away quickly for fear her sisters should notice her agitation. It is the princess he loves, she thought sadly. If he could see me now in these ragged clothes, to find me at my drudgery in the kitchen, would he recognize me? And even if he did not know me again, would he not be horrified to think that he had danced with a kitchen maid? And then she thought that everything was better as it was. The prince would never see her again, and in time, perhaps he might forget. But Cinderella would never forget. She knew that all her life long the memory of those 2 happy evenings would remain with her always, like a beautiful dream. Aw, Cinderella. Hello, why? All right, so we are on to chapter 10. It's been a minute, so I just thought I'd throw out there. Make sure you're hydrating, caffeinating, doing whatever you need to take care of yourselves, dear viewers. All right. Chapter 10. The Glass Slipper. Dun dun dun. Charlotte was right. Though the prince had only spent 2 evenings in Cinderella's company, he already loved her dearly, not only because of her beauty, but because of her sweet nature, which nobody could help seeing. He felt sure that she must be in some trouble, otherwise she would not have run away from the ball so suddenly, and he made up his mind to find her, and protect her from anyone who would do her harm. The first thing he did was go into the courtyard, for he thought he might just be in time to see her before her carriage drove away. When he got there, however, he was astonished to hear that the carriage, with all its horses and footmen, had absolutely disappeared. No one had seen the carriage drive away, yet not a sign of it was to be seen. Very much puzzled, the prince sent a servant to ask the guards at all the other gates whether they had seen the princess go out, for he thought she might perhaps have sent her carriage away early and gone home on foot. But the guards were positive that nobody had passed out of the gates except a shabbily dressed girl, whom they took to be one of the scullery maids. Now the prince was not only a very handsome young man, but he was fairly clever also, and in this case love made him sharp. He thought immediately that this poorly dressed maid, seen by the guards, might be the lady he sought, who had disguised herself for some reason of her own. If she went on foot, he said to himself, she cannot be very far away, and in that case I can certainly discover her. That night he hardly got a wink of sleep, but in the morning he had thought of a plan. First of all, he gave orders that every lady at the court must come and try on the slipper which Cinderella had left behind. Not one of them was left out. First of all came the princesses. So you can see the princesses in the land there, dressed very fine with their crowns in their hair. And then the duchesses, pumped up, again, smaller crowns, detailed finery. And then the countesses, including a very elderly countess with a walking stick. And so on to the plain gentlewomen, until it was the turn of the servants in the kitchen. But the slipper would not go on the foot of any of them, nor the cat neither, apparently. After that, the prince sent out a proclamation that every lady in the town and in the country round about, be she high or low, must try on the glass slipper, and that when he found the lady whom the slipper would fit, he would make her his wife. There was great excitement when the proclamation was read in the marketplace. People knew that something out of the ordinary was afoot. Ah, the pun. As soon as they saw the court courier with his big curly wig and his trumpeters, they left whatever they were doing and crowded round him to listen and to stare at the glass slipper, which was a little blackamoor carried on a velvet cushion. I don't know what that meant. Sus. When he had finished reading, he had hardly time to fold up the parchment and put it in his pocket before there were about 100 women clamoring to try the slipper on. Here's a chance that comes only once in a lifetime, said a stout old lady, plumping herself down in the chair with an attendant had set ready. One does not get the opportunity of marrying a king's son every day. And she waggled her fat foot and tried to work her toes into the dainty shoe, which was at least 6 sizes too small. 6 sizes too small. Well, how big was her foot? Then they all came, one after the other, citizens and shopkeepers' daughters, and tried their utmost to get the slipper to go on. Many of them had very small, pretty feet, too, but for some mysterious reason the slipper always seemed a little smaller than the very daintiest foot. The truth is, of course, that it was a magic slipper, and could by no means be made to fit anybody except its rightful owner. So it was all in vain, and at last the courier, his trumpeters, and his— I don't know what that word is, and I don't know that it's a good one— and his man left the town and set off to try their fortune in the country houses. By this time, Cinderella's stepsisters had heard the news and were almost beside themselves with excitement. "Do you hear, Euphronia?" cried Charlotte. "The prince has announced that he will marry the lady whom the slipper fits. I am perfectly certain that it is just my size, for I took particular note of the lady's shoes when she was dancing." "Pooh, what nonsense!" answered Euphronia with a scornful smile. "Everybody knows that you take 9s in shoes, and that is 2 sizes larger than mine. For my part, I also took careful note of the glass slippers, and I am positive they were 7s. Besides, they were slim and elegant shoes, not at all suitable for massive feet like yours." Here Euphronia stretched out her own long and bony foot, clothed in its red stocking, and gazed at it admiringly, while Charlotte sniffed. Soon afterwards the sound of the trumpet was heard outside, and a loud knock came to the door. Cinderella opened it, and showed the courier into the drawing-room, where the sisters were already sitting, dressed in their best. After she had shown him in, she went into the kitchen again, for she had not received an invitation to stay. The courier read the proclamation, and the servant knelt down to try the slipper on Charlotte's foot, which was already extended towards him. "No, no, I should be first," cried Euphronia. "It is perfectly useless to try the slipper on Charlotte. Anybody can see with a glance it is much too small." "Nothing of the kind," snapped Charlotte, squeezing her toes into the slipper so that she winced with pain. "A little humoring is all that is necessary." And she insisted on trying again and again until it was evident that she could never succeed in getting the slipper on, even if she tried for years. "I told you," said Euphronia. "Now it is my turn," and she stretched out her ugly foot so quickly that she nearly knocked the poor attendant over. She too struggled and wriggled, but it was all in vain, and at last the courier became very impatient. "It is no use, madame," said he. "The slipper will not fit either of you. Are there any other ladies in the house?" "No," said Euphronia, "there are not, and I'm certain that I could get the shoe on if you would only let me try just once more. My foot was almost inside when you snatched the slipper away." "I think you are mistaken, madame," answered the courier politely. "There was a young girl who opened the doors for us. Who was she?" What do you mean, cinder slut? Cried Euphronia, with a mighty scornful laugh. She, you must know, is our kitchen maid, who does all our dirty work. No matter, answered the courier firmly. The prince's orders are not to leave out anybody, whether of high rank or low. So will you leave? With your leave, I will try. This is really infamous, cried Euphronia with a stamp of her foot. But it was useless to argue, for the courier, without wasting any more words, walked into the kitchen. Cinderella rose in surprise as he entered, and even in her ragged working dress she looked so lovely that the courier opened his eyes. Here he is going into the kitchen. Oh, I'm glad I didn't. So, into the kitchen with a slipper. Then we have the sisters arguing against. That might be her dad and the Baroness. I'm not sure. In the room on the right. Will you please sit down, madame, said he, and try the slipper on. Madam, indeed, sniffed Euphronia. What next, I wonder? But the courier took no notice of her, for at the very first trial the slipper glided on to Cinderella's dainty foot with the greatest ease. How the sisters stared! Euphronia's face turned almost green with rage and envy, while Charlotte glared. But their surprise was as nothing to the shock they received the next moment, for Cinderella calmly took the other shoe from her pocket and put it on the other foot. These were the pair of them, gleaming and flashing, so that her feet seemed shod with light. Well, I never, muttered Euphronia, of all the deceitful little... And then she stopped suddenly, for another figure had come into the room, out of nowhere, as it appeared. For one moment she wasn't there, and the next she stood smiling behind Cinderella's chair. It was the figure of an old woman dressed in a red petticoat, with a pointed hat on her head. She lifted her stick and touched the girl lightly on the shoulder. In that moment Cinderella's rags dropped away, and she appeared dressed in the beautiful gown of the white silk in which she had first gone to the ball. She looked so lovely as she sat there that the courier fell on his knees and kissed her hand, as one kisses the hand of a queen. Then the old godmother spoke, and her voice was very stern and hard. Proud and cruel girls, she said, look upon the sister whom you have despised and have used so spitefully. She is the daughter of the house, but you robbed her of all the joy that should have been hers. Now she shall be the greatest lady in the land, and you shall creep to her feet for forgiveness. And that is just what the stepsisters did, weeping and crying for pardon. But Cinderella, whose kind heart felt pity for their discomfiture, raised them with a kiss. And this is a thing not many girls would have done who had suffered as Cinderella had suffered at these girls' hands, but she had a sweet and gentle nature. She even kissed the Baroness, who came into the room just in time to see her daughters kneeling, and who dropped her lorgnette. Oh, I already forgot how to pronounce it. I've only just learned the word. Helps if I use the right letter. Lorgnette. Lorgnette. There we go. And who dropped her lorgnette in surprise. Then the fairy godmother said that the carriage was waiting, and they all went down into the courtyard, where they found the magnificent gilt coach, with its 6 grey horses already harnessed, and the coachman and lackeys in their place. So Cinderella drove away, and there was no happier man in all the world than the prince when he saw her again, and knew that she would not go away any more. Cinderella, too, was happy, for she loved him and wished for nothing better than to be his wife. A week later they were married with great pomp and ceremony. The rejoicings lasted a full week, and all the town made holiday. Euphronia and Charlotte were at the wedding, and they never uttered a single spiteful word, not even below their breath, for they were really sorry for their conduct. As soon as she was settled down, Cinderella sent for them and gave them each a suite of grand apartments at the palace. Not long afterwards, they married two gentlemen of the court, and Cinderella and the prince lived happily together for the rest of their lives. That's all she wrote. That's the inner liner there. And with that, we have completed the story, which it ended a bit sooner than I thought it would, but I'm also not that surprised. So that was the entirety of Cinderella, one of two stories illustrated by Arthur Rackham. And as a reminder, Arthur Rackham. Artwork, beautiful artwork. I'll go back to the cover and talk for a minute. So, I thought that was a good story. I liked the retelling. I think that the Brothers Grimm's version, where they got Charles Perrault's original story, is much more gruesome. So Ella, her stepsisters, like the father dies in that one. The stepsisters are told by their mother to cut off their toe and heel prospectively, um, respectively, yeah, prospectively, um, and then to try and shove their feet into the glass shoes. Um, they get away from dying, but during the course of the ceremony, Cinderella and the prince are walking up the aisle, and they each of them have one eye pecked out, and as they're leaving the ceremony, the opposite eyes are pecked out. So they're just standing there with bloody eye sockets. It's wild. One of them's missing a toe, one of them's missing a heel. They both lose their eyesight, and their mother is made to dance in red hot iron shoes until she dies. So yeah, I would say that this is a much softer version than the original that was gathered up. Yeah, classic ye old wedding. They're like throwing grains and flowers and getting their eyes pecked out. Yeah, it was a bit of a change. But I digress. This was a good story. This is definitely closer to the classic Cinderella that I grew up knowing. Um, it was soft, it was sweet. I felt like the good nature of Ella came through the whole story. Honestly, I feel like this godmother, unlike the Disney godmother, was kind of a badass. You know, she was like, "Hey, if you don't do the thing, you're gonna get in trouble," and then just magically appeared here and there and swooped up the chimney like Santa Claus. So definitely a bit of a departure. All right, for you lovely listeners that happen to stop in and take a listen, and my wonderful lurkers that are in the Do Not Disturb, let's find someone lovely to go visit. Um, let's see. Unfortunately, some of the people that I wanted to go visit are probably asleep by now. Let's find somebody to visit. There's a couple of different artists out there that are working. Vil is just chatting. Jinx Doodle is doing some art. Segoy is just chatting. Two Goody Two Shoes. Hootie Hoo, Short Hike. Wait, are they actually like in the process of hiking? That would be kind of cool. Oh no, it's a game. A short hike is a game. There is people playing plenty of various action games. I'm gonna lean into, I think, Jinx. Basil Leaf is doing League of Legends. I am forced to have to look. Let's see if we can find another reader. I wish there was just reading. Reading fun category. Let's see who's out there. Magic the Gathering. Reading stream. I thought about getting into archery, but there are many drawbacks. But I love good pun. What do we got here? Past videos. Currently, there are not that many people in this category. Go figure. All right, we're gonna go visit. Let's see. Yeah, let's go Jinx. We'll go to Jinx Doodle. Amazing artist if you haven't seen their work. Let me go ahead and pull them up here. Oh, cute. They've got kind of this witchy green and brown vibes today. Let's go raid Jinx Doodle. This will be lovely. So, hold on to your hats. Let's see. Jinx Doodle. There you are. All right. All aboard.